When your family decides you're expendable, even your name feels borrowed. The snow outside whispered against the windows of the tiny apartment, soft and persistent, like the hush of secrets no one wanted to admit. Morgan Hale sat on the worn-out couch in a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, her hands cradling a lukewarm mug of black coffee that had long since lost its warmth, much like her connection to anything that once resembled home. 12 years. That's how long it had been since the silence had begun. Her phone buzzed on the table, its glow cutting through the half-dark of the room, but she ignored it. It wasn't time yet. Not for that call. That call wouldn't come until much later. Right now, she sat with the past like it was a guest that refused to leave. The memory crept in the way cold does. Slow, quiet, and all-consuming. The Hale Foundation boardroom had smelled of varnish and betrayal. Morgan remembered the long mahogany table, the clack of heels against marble, and the sharp scent of Charlotte's perfume cutting through the tension like a scalpel. The whole board had been gathered. Her father, her cousin, even Daniel, her younger brother. She was 21 and confident back then, until Charlotte slid a folder across the table with that smile. Tight. Victorious. "These are internal audits from the last quarter," Charlotte announced, her voice clear, professional, and sharp enough to wound. "They show unexplained transfers from the Foundation's account to Morgan's personal bank." Morgan's breath had caught. "That's not true, I haven't—" "Is it true?" Her father interrupted. Not a hint of warmth in his voice. Just the weight of expectation, of family honor. That was the only question anyone ever asked her. "Is it true?" Not, "How do you explain this?" Not, "Let's investigate further." Just, "Is it true?" And when she hesitated, stunned, scrambling for air, dignity, words, her silence was mistaken for guilt. Minutes later, she was told to resign from the board. Her scholarship at Johns Hopkins was no longer appropriate. The press release was drafted before she'd even walked out of the room. Her father hadn't looked at her when he said, "You'll need to move out by tonight. We've arranged for the car." Charlotte had folded her arms, victorious. Daniel just stood there, his mouth a sealed line. Not a single word. Not even "I'm sorry." Morgan blinked out of the memory and rubbed her thumb along the rim of the coffee mug. The apartment heater coughed, spitting warmth that never reached far. Silence filled the space like fog. She remembered the last time she saw her mother. On the front steps, the house lit behind her like a stage Morgan had been pushed off. "You've made things difficult for all of us," her mother had said, her voice trembling, but not from sadness. "Please respect our space." Their space. That was the moment Morgan understood. Blood doesn't mean belonging. Later that night, she stuffed her clothes into a duffel bag and left the house that had once been hers. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She moved, breath by breath, like someone walking underwater. On the way out, she slipped the Hale family ring, gold with a dark emerald center, off her finger and into her pocket. She didn't wear it again, but she didn't throw it away either. She remembered walking through Boston's icy streets in the dead of night, aimless and hollow. The city was too alive, too loud. She wasn't made for those sounds anymore. And then, almost by instinct, her feet carried her to a place she hadn't expected. The military recruitment office. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, and the man behind the counter looked up, startled by the sight of a young woman with nothing in her hands but a ring in her pocket and fury in her eyes. "I want to serve," she told him. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I want to earn back my name." He handed her a clipboard. "Start here." Now, 12 years later, Morgan sat alone in the quiet, the sound of her breath the only rhythm in the room. She didn't think of Charlotte, or Edward, or even Daniel, but sometimes, like now, she wondered if anyone ever regretted what they did, or if the silence they left behind was all the closure they needed. The phone buzzed again. This time, she picked it up. The name on the screen was one she hadn't seen in over a decade. Her breath caught. 3 a.m., and just like that, the silence cracked. "War didn't break me. Silence did. The sun in Kandahar didn't rise. It assaulted. Light came down like judgment, sharp and dry, bleaching the canvas tents and searing everything it touched. The sand was omnipresent, settling in creases, lungs, and souls. Yet it was in this blistering nowhere that Morgan Hale began to reclaim pieces of herself, small, hard-earned fragments. The medical tent buzzed with heat and urgency. The air smelled of iodine, sweat, and blood. Morgan moved like muscle memory, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp, voice calm. A soldier lay on the cot before her, shrapnel tearing crimson across his side. She didn't flinch, hands steady, heart locked away. Pulse dropping, Jasmine said beside her, voice tight but composed. Morgan didn't reply. She pressed gauze, clamped vessels, closed wounds. The soldier's breath evened. Alive, for now. When the emergency was over, silence settled again. But not the kind Morgan feared. This silence held respect, understanding, survival. That night, Morgan sat alone outside the tent, staring at the desert horizon. The wind carried dust like whispers. She opened her notebook. Not a journal, not really. It had no name, no dates. Just thoughts scrawled in silence. They said I shamed the family. But here, shame bleeds. Shame dies. And I keep the dying alive. She didn't sign it. She never did. Footsteps crunched behind her. Jasmine appeared, holding 2 tin mugs of tea. She dropped beside her, knees brushing sand, dark eyes scanning the same nothing. You ever been betrayed so badly? Jasmine asked suddenly. You stopped believing in blood? Morgan froze. The words hovered, sharp as broken glass. She thought of Charlotte's smirk, her father's voice, her mother's cold goodbye. She didn't answer. Jasmine didn't press. Instead, she handed Morgan a small envelope, unmarked except for 5 careful words in blue ink. Your truth. J.W. Morgan turned it over in her fingers. It was sealed tight, almost heavy. Not for now, Jasmine said. But one day when the silence is too loud. Morgan tucked it into the inside pocket of her uniform. She would carry it there for years. War moved forward. Days blurred into nights, missions into memories. Morgan became a name spoken with quiet respect. She saved lives, wrote nothing about it, and learned to live with the dust. But not all missions succeeded. 3 years in, during a failed extraction north of Spin Boldak, Morgan crawled through shattered concrete to reach a young soldier pinned under debris. His breathing was ragged. Blood pooled fast. Too fast. I've got you, she whispered, voice steady as she clutched his hand. He was barely 20, pale eyes searching hers, not for rescue, but for recognition. I don't want to be forgotten, he rasped. She swallowed the lump in her throat. You won't be, she said, and tightened her grip. You mattered. His hand went limp moments later. Morgan didn't cry. She didn't have tears left. But that night, her diary page was empty. Only a single phrase written dead center. He mattered. 5 years later, she still hadn't opened Jasmine's envelope. But she kept it closer than her dog tags. The war hardened her, but it hadn't made her cruel. It had reminded her that worth wasn't granted by bloodlines or legacies. It was proven. By action, by sacrifice, by choosing to stay in the dust when others ran. On the night of the 5th year since that rescue mission, Morgan lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The base was quiet. Too quiet. No helicopters overhead. No radio static. Just the creak of canvas and the occasional snore from another cot. She picked up her phone out of habit. The screen glowed pale blue in the dark. One missed call, 3:14 a.m. Alden Grace Memorial Hospital. Her breath caught. The name tugged something deep. A knot tied long ago by betrayal and silence. She stared at the screen for a long time. And suddenly, the envelope in her pocket felt heavier than ever. 12 years of silence undone by a single line. You kept her breathing when we couldn't. The automatic doors of Alden Grace Memorial opened with a sterile hiss, but to Morgan Hale, it sounded more like a sigh, long and reluctant. The hospital's fluorescent lights stung her eyes after the long, frigid cab ride. She hadn't changed out of her cargo jacket. Sand still clung to her boots, a trail of Afghanistan threading behind every step she took across the polished floor. She moved like a ghost returning to the scene of her own funeral. At the front desk, a nurse looked up. Young, flustered. But before she could speak, another voice came from the hallway behind her. "Morgan Hale?" It was precise, steady. A woman in scrubs approached briskly. Her badge read Ava Reed, RN Lead ICU. "I'm Ava, come with me. She's in critical but stable condition." Morgan said nothing, just followed, her steps muted on the tiled floor. The scent of antiseptic and the faint beep of monitors filled the hall, each beat tightening something in her chest. She hadn't heard her name spoken with purpose in over a decade. Not like this. They turned a corner. Ava pushed open the ICU door. Inside, surrounded by white machines and even whiter silence, lay Charlotte Hale. A tube extended from her mouth. Her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision. Monitors blinked steadily. The woman who had once orchestrated her downfall now looked small, vulnerable, and utterly unrecognizable beneath oxygen and surgical tape. Morgan's gaze was unwavering. A rustle came from the corner. Marianne Hale. Her mother rose from the chair like something pulled reluctantly from the past. Older now, less composed, but her eyes still had that same steel. "You can't be here," Marianne said, almost a whisper, but sharpened with instinct. Morgan didn't answer. She didn't have to. Ava turned, voice cool but resolute. "Mrs. Hale, she's listed as the sole emergency contact and medical decision authority." Her mother froze. "That can't be, Charlotte wouldn't—" "It was federally updated 6 years ago," Ava replied. "Level 1 override. All personnel report to Ms. Hale now." Morgan remained still. Her silence had weight. It filled the room, pressing down on every heartbeat. One by one, the attending doctors turned to her, awaiting instruction. No one questioned it. No one hesitated. Ava stepped closer and handed Morgan a clipboard. Her voice softened just enough to reach the edge of reverence. "Ma'am," she said, "you kept her breathing when we couldn't." The line struck harder than any explosion Morgan had faced in Kandahar. She didn't move right away, just stared at Charlotte, this woman who had once sealed her fate with false ledgers and a smile. How ironic that the hands Charlotte tried to erase had now written her back into life. There was no joy in it, no vengeance, just the solemn finality of truth being too heavy to ignore. Morgan reached for the pen. The document was standard: post-operative care directive, ventilation maintenance schedule, ICU recovery consent. Her eyes scanned the line at the bottom. Authorized decision maker. Her hand didn't tremble. Morgan Hale. 12 years of being erased undone in 5 bold letters, not whispered, not questioned, written. Behind her, her mother sank slowly back into the chair, hands folded tight in her lap. There was no argument, no protest, because the truth didn't need volume. It just needed presence. Morgan handed the clipboard back to Ava, who nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. She took one last look at Charlotte, then turned toward the window. Snow had begun falling again. Silent, steady. Some battles weren't fought on fields. Some didn't even require a voice. But when the truth arrived, it didn't ask permission. She erased me with a lie. I answered her with a sealed envelope. The early morning air was thin and wet with mist, the kind that clung to your sleeves and refused to let go. Morgan sat quietly on the weathered wooden bench in the hospital garden, wrapped in a plain wool coat that had seen both war zones and waiting rooms. The trees stood bare, branches drawn like ribs against the pale sky. Across from her, Charlotte Hale was slowly lowered into a wheelchair by a nurse. Her movements were slow, her face pale, drained by the ventilator and the surgery that had nearly claimed her life. But it wasn't her condition that made her appear so small. It was the unmistakable absence of power. For the first time, Charlotte looked like someone who had to receive what came next instead of delivering it. Morgan didn't speak. She didn't move. From her coat pocket, she drew the envelope. The same one she had carried for 5 years. The one Jasmine Wu had sealed with unshakable faith and left with 5 words. Your truth. J.W. Morgan placed it on the bench between them. She didn't look at Charlotte, didn't gesture, didn't explain. The envelope lay there, quiet, unassuming. But its presence was louder than any accusation ever hurled in that boardroom 12 years ago. Charlotte didn't touch it right away. She stared at it, eyes tracing the handwriting she recognized immediately. Not Morgan's, but Jasmine's. Her fingers clenched the edge of the blanket draped over her lap, the only part of her betraying what she felt. She knew what it was. She had always known there was something. Something Morgan had never fought to expose, never screamed about. And now it sat between them like a verdict finally delivered. I remember this folder, Charlotte murmured, her voice gravelly from intubation. Her eyes, once sharp enough to command rooms, now struggled to meet Morgan's. Morgan finally looked at her. Calm, steady, empty of rage. You had my name removed from the council, she said, voice low but precise. You sent the audit file with forged signatures. You made sure no one asked questions. Charlotte didn't deny it. I had to, she said after a long pause. You were shining too brightly. They listened to you. Morgan's face didn't shift. She didn't react. The silence between them settled heavy like snow on branches. I graduated from the lie too late, Charlotte whispered, looking down at her hands. It wasn't an apology. Not quite. It was a kind of confession, without justification, without redemption. Morgan's voice was as even as the mist in the air. I'm not here to forgive. I'm here to draw the line. She stood up slowly, her gaze unmoving. Charlotte finally reached for the envelope. Her fingers trembled as she held it, turning it over once, then twice. She didn't open it. Not yet. She looked up. What do I do with this? She asked, as if the answer might undo 12 years of betrayal. Morgan paused. You don't get to pretend it didn't happen. Her words weren't cruel. They were just true. Charlotte's eyes filled, not with tears, but with the kind of regret that blooms too late to matter. Morgan turned and walked away, the frost crunching lightly beneath her boots. She didn't look back. The envelope remained unopened in Charlotte's lap, a simple seal holding inside everything that had once been taken, and now irrevocably returned. They took my name off the board, so I wrote it back into the world. The motel was nothing special, just a square room with beige walls and a window that opened halfway. But it was quiet, and for Morgan Hale, quiet meant clarity. The hospital was only 3 blocks away. She could walk there if needed. She often did. Outside, the sun was setting in wide amber strokes. The air was still, save for the occasional rush of wind weaving through the trees and the distant calls of birds returning to roost. It was the kind of evening that looked like closure. Morgan sat at the small desk beneath the window, the old black notebook open in front of her. Its pages were filled with jagged scrawls, field notes, memories, silent confessions. She had never signed any of them, until now. The last page was blank. She stared at it, pen poised, then paused as her phone buzzed once. Then again. A message. Daniel Hale. The name alone made her shoulders tense. She hadn't seen or heard from her cousin since that night 12 years ago when he'd stood in the boardroom and said nothing. He hadn't lied. He hadn't accused. He had simply disappeared into silence. Morgan tapped to open the message. I saw the folder, the one Charlotte used. I knew it wasn't you. I knew from the start. But I stayed quiet. I'm sorry. Morgan stared at the screen. Her chest didn't tighten. Her eyes didn't sting. She simply breathed. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She typed back, "Why now?" The reply came faster than she expected. "Because silence made me complicit. And I can't live with that anymore." Morgan leaned back in the chair. The wind outside picked up, rustling the leaves like pages being turned. The birds had stopped singing. Evening had settled. She looked back at the notebook. The final page still waited. She took the pen and, slowly, deliberately, wrote Daniel's name. First name, last name, full. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't warmth. It was truth. He was no longer erased. A few moments later, her phone rang. It was him. She didn't greet him. "Daniel," she said plainly. "I'm going to testify," he said. His voice was clearer than she remembered. "At the Hale Foundation. Internal review. I've already asked for an appointment. I'll say everything. The timeline, the meeting, the forged documents." Morgan didn't thank him. She didn't need to. Instead, she said, "Then say it." Fully. A pause. "I will." She ended the call. The sun dipped lower, touching the horizon in a soft blaze. The motel room remained untouched by its warmth, but Morgan felt a shift. Small, subtle. Her phone buzzed again. A new number. She answered without emotion. "Ms. Hale," a formal voice spoke. "This is Dr. Layton from the Hale Foundation's Review and Ethics Office. Are you available to give a formal statement this week regarding the 2012 incident?" Morgan closed the notebook. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I am." The voice continued, confirming the date, the procedure. She listened without needing details. The important part was already done. Outside, the wind carried dust and leaves across the parking lot. She watched them swirl in patterns only the quiet could trace. 12 years ago, they took her name off the wall. Now she had written it back. Line by line, truth by truth. Not for recognition, not for revenge, but because the world couldn't decide who she was. Only she could. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering with power, not pain. The ICU was quieter than usual for a weekend, its usual tension replaced by something more settled. The machines still beeped and monitors still flickered, but there was no chaos today. Only presence. Morgan Hale stood at the corner desk near the nurse's station, packing the last of her documents into a slim folder. Her badge was clipped off. Her notebook zipped safely in the inside pocket of her coat. She hadn't worn scrubs in years, but somehow these few days had reawakened a side of her she thought she'd buried with sand and silence. Behind her, the door to room 203 opened with a gentle hiss. Charlotte Hale sat up in bed now, no longer tethered to tubes, her face no longer pale with near death. Her strength had returned, if only partially. But her authority, the one she used to wield like a sword, was gone. What remained was simply the woman. Morgan didn't turn. "I heard you're leaving today," Charlotte said softly. Morgan glanced over her shoulder. "I was never staying." Charlotte hesitated. Then, in a voice almost too quiet for someone used to commanding rooms, she said, "You were never useless." The words hung in the air, simple yet soaked in weight. Morgan met her gaze. No anger, no vindication, just understanding. "I know," Morgan said. "You were the one who didn't." She left the room without ceremony. Down the hall, Nurse Ava Reed waited by the small memorial alcove near the end of the ICU wing. The walls here were white, newly painted, the plaque not yet unveiled. A few staff gathered around casually, doctors, nurses, a janitor or two. But no speeches were planned. No press release. Just presence. Ava smiled as Morgan approached. "I hope you don't hate surprises," she said with a glint in her eye. "I'm allergic to them," Morgan deadpanned. Ava lifted the corner of the cloth draped over the wall. Beneath it, polished bronze caught the light. The Ava Reed Trauma Wing, dedicated to quiet courage, steadfast leadership, and saving what others gave up on. Morgan stepped closer. Her reflection shone faintly in the metal. "You suggested my name?" Ava asked, half knowing the answer. Morgan nodded. "Someone had to carry the story, and you never flinched." Ava swallowed, suddenly serious. "But why not yours?" "Because people remember heroes, but they follow those who stay," Morgan replied. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ava leaned in slightly and whispered, "You all thought I needed revenge," Morgan said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. "But I just needed truth to breathe again." A nurse nearby blinked, not fully understanding, but feeling the gravity nonetheless. Her phone buzzed as she exited the wing. "Jasmine." Morgan answered on the second ring. "You open it?" Jasmine asked without greeting. "I did," Morgan said. "Did it break anything?" "No," Morgan said. "It set something down." There was a pause on the other end. "I wish I could have seen her face," Jasmine murmured. Morgan allowed a faint, dry chuckle. It wasn't worth watching. But the silence after? That was something. "Come find me when you're ready," Jasmine added. "There's still a whole world to fix." "I'll think about it," Morgan replied, and hung up. She took the long hallway out, past the elevator, down the stairwell, out the staff door where the last snow was still melting in patches. Boston hadn't changed. The world hadn't changed. But Morgan had. She reached the edge of the parking lot and paused, watching the pale afternoon stretch ahead. A wind swept past, tugging at her coat. The notebook was still in her hand. She looked down at it. Signed now, dated, closed. No longer a secret. From behind, she heard Charlotte's voice in memory. Not a plea, not an apology. Just a question. "Can I try to earn a place again?" And her own voice in return, even now, felt like a door locking behind her. "Not beside me. Somewhere new. Away from what you broke." Because some things don't need to be repaired. Some things just need to be buried. Properly, with markers to remember them by. She took a breath, then another, and walked forward. They tried to erase me, but I remembered loud enough for the world to hear. She walked out not as a victim, but as someone who had turned silence into truth. The lies that once stripped her name away could no longer hold weight against the proof she carried and the courage she chose. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. No wall of deceit can stand forever when truth refuses to kneel. If you felt her journey in your heart, like, share, subscribe, and comment 1 to show you stand with justice.